Losing your home feels impossible until it happens. One unexpected bill, one job loss, and suddenly everything falls apart. And once you're homeless, escaping becomes nearly impossible. For millions, this is reality. Shelters are overcrowded, rent keeps rising, and government aid barely makes a difference. In most countries, homelessness isn't just a crisis. It's a cycle that traps people for years. But one country did something different. While the rest of the world struggles, their homelessness numbers have been steadily declining. A system praised again and again. On paper, it looks like they cracked the code. But did they really? It turns out the truth is far more complicated. This is how Norway solved homelessness. For most of the world, homelessness is a crisis that only gets worse. Every year, millions of people lose their homes, forced into overcrowded shelters or left to sleep on the streets. Governments pour billions into temporary solutions, yet the numbers keep rising. But Norway tells a different story. In 2020, the country reported just 3,325 homeless people, a rate of 0.62 per 1,000 inhabitants. Compared to nations like the United States, the United Kingdom, and France, where homelessness is reaching catastrophic levels, Norway seems to have done the impossible. At the heart of this success is a radical approach called housing first. Unlike traditional programs, which require people to meet strict conditions, such as finding a job or getting sober before receiving permanent housing, Norway does the opposite. Instead of treating housing as a reward, it becomes the first step. Anyone experiencing homelessness is given a home immediately. There are no conditions and no endless waiting lists. Once housed, they receive long-term support with financial aid, mental health care, and job assistance to ensure they stay off the streets permanently. This approach is built on a simple but powerful idea. Solving homelessness starts with giving people homes. Instead of forcing them to climb an impossible ladder, the system removes the biggest obstacle standing in their way. And on paper, it works. Since adopting housing first, Norway's homelessness rate has steadily declined. In cities like Oslo and Bergen, visible homelessness is rare. Unlike in other major cities like Los Angeles, where tent encampments line the streets, Norway looks different. But beneath the surface, things are not as perfect as they seem. Norway's success in reducing homelessness is often credited to its housing-first approach. But behind this achievement lies something far more complex. At the heart of the system is Husbanken, the Norwegian state housing bank. Unlike commercial banks, its purpose is not to generate profits, but to ensure housing for those in need. It provides crucial funding to local governments, allowing them to develop affordable housing, while also offering low-interest loans to landlords who rent to vulnerable tenants. For those still struggling, rental assistance helps make sure they can afford to stay in their homes. But financial aid alone isn't enough. Norway's strong social safety net plays an equally important role. Universal healthcare, free education, and extensive unemployment benefits create a foundation where financial hardship doesn't immediately result in homelessness. If someone loses their job, they aren't left to fend for themselves. The government steps in early, ensuring they don't slip through the cracks. This is what makes Norway different. In many countries, losing your home can mean losing everything. Without a permanent address, applying for jobs becomes nearly impossible. Without stable income, saving for rent is out of reach. The longer someone remains homeless, the harder it becomes to escape. The damage, both physical and psychological, can last a lifetime. Norway's system is designed to stop this cycle before it starts. When someone is at risk of eviction, they receive immediate financial aid, legal support, or access to alternative housing. Instead of waiting until people end up on the streets, the government acts before it's too late. And the results are undeniable. Since implementing this approach, Norway has drastically reduced street homelessness. But maintaining this system is no small feat. It requires continuous government investment, widespread political support, and a strong economy to sustain it. Even in Norway, challenges remain. Rising housing costs, an aging population, and shifting economic conditions could all threaten the future of this model. For now, the system is working, but how long can it last? And if this approach is so effective, why hasn't the rest of the world followed? Norway's approach to homelessness has changed thousands of lives. The country has fewer people on the streets, and Housing First has helped many rebuild their futures. On paper, it looks like undeniable success, but the numbers don't tell the whole story. Unlike in other countries where homelessness is easy to see, Norway's homeless population remains hidden. Thousands live in emergency housing, short-term rentals, or government-assisted apartments, but because they have a roof over their heads, they no longer count as homeless. Even those struggling to pay rent or bouncing between temporary living spaces disappear from the statistics. For some, housing first is a path to a better future. It prevents people from spiraling into permanent homelessness and avoids the endless cycle of shelters and tent cities seen elsewhere. It's a solution that seems humane, efficient, and effective, but it comes at a cost. Norway spends billions keeping this model running, funding not just housing but also social workers, rental assistance, and long-term support programs. For now, the country can afford it. But as the economy shifts and housing demand increases, pressure on the system continues to grow. And not everyone thrives under this model. Many people placed in housing first still struggle with addiction, unemployment, or mental health issues. Having a roof over their heads provides stability, but it doesn't solve the deeper problems that led them into homelessness in the first place. Without continued support, some end up back where they started. There's also a growing challenge: Norway's housing market. Cities like Oslo are experiencing rising property costs, making it harder to maintain a steady supply of affordable housing. And as urban areas grow, so do waiting lists for social housing, putting more strain on the system. As costs rise and demand grows, keeping people housed is becoming more difficult. And that's why Norway came up with a solution. In 2021 alone, Norway spent over $600 million on its homelessness programs, one of the highest rates per capita in the world. The government subsidizes housing, pays for support workers, and covers rent assistance for thousands of people. Unlike in other countries where shelters and charities play a major role, Norway's model is almost entirely taxpayer-funded. On paper, this sounds like a massive expense, but in reality, it prevents even bigger costs down the road. Studies have shown that each person placed in housing first can save the government up to $29,400 per year by reducing reliance on emergency healthcare, police intervention, and short-term shelters. In the long run, keeping people housed is far cheaper than letting homelessness spiral out of control. And it has worked. Over the years, Norway has reduced long-term homelessness, easing the burden on hospitals, courts, and law enforcement. Many people who would have been stuck in an endless cycle of shelters and crisis services now have permanent addresses, jobs, and stability. But keeping this system afloat requires more than just funding. As the population grows and housing markets shift, the cost of maintaining this model continues to rise. Even with oil wealth supporting much of Norway's budget, nothing lasts forever, and problems are already starting to appear. Cities like Oslo have reported increasing demand for affordable housing, while some local governments warn that funding is stretched thin. For now, Norway's system holds strong. But the question is no longer if challenges will come, it's when. Still, one thing is clear: homelessness isn't an unsolvable problem. It's a choice societies make, and Norway made its choice. So if one country can nearly eliminate homelessness, why hasn't anyone else? Is it really impossible or just inconvenient?